For those who saw the first video in this series, I won't be so long-winded about what we're doing, but for those new to this concept, hi, I'm Greeper and I like Shadow the Hedgehog. Like, a lot. Like, so much so that I'm practicing puppeting a live 2D model using Shadow as my placeholder. Hi. Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, has 326 possible story paths you can play through. Now, all of these paths are titled, numbered, and listed in the game's library area. So to avoid having to make my own decisions, which I'm extremely bad at, I'm going to have a picker wheel provide me with a number between 1 and 326, excluding the number 62 because we did that path already in the first video. Then I'm going to play through the corresponding path and try to make sense of the story that that path tells. Big emphasis on the word try here because not all of the 326 possible story paths are going to be written extremely well. With that said, Jarvis, spin it a little. So path number 167 is called Shadow Surpassing Shadow, and here's the level path that we'll be taking. By the way, this graphic and this list of all of the paths in the game come from sonicretro.org, which is a really good resource if you're looking for all of this information for some reason. From the name alone, I'm thinking this is going to have something to do with the whole "is this Shadow the real Shadow" plot point that originally came from Sonic Heroes, but I guess we'll just see as we go. So let's see what this path has for us. As always, we start with brooding Shadow looking out at Westopolis and getting flashbacks of Maria getting the old John Lennon treatment, which I neglected to mention in the previous playthrough. Anyway, the black arms start falling from the sky, Black Doom appears wanting Shadow to bring him the Chaos Emeralds quote-unquote as promised. Shadow figures Doom might know something about his past and takes off into the city to see if he can start rounding up Chaos Emeralds there. This time, rather than taking direct orders from Doom, Shadow is solely concerned about getting the Chaos Emeralds, which does still make sense from a story standpoint. Shadow is basically given the impression by Black Doom that Chaos Emeralds are the means to getting his memory back, so it would stand to reason that he really doesn't care about what other favors Doom is asking for. He also likely isn't so concerned about the state of Westopolis since he knows Sonic is there to clean up the Black Arms since you're literally forced to acknowledge Sonic in this level. I should mention really quickly here, the neutral missions, which we'll be doing for the first 3 levels, don't really offer much in the way of plot progression in the levels themselves. The reason for Shadow's decisions in most neutral missions is basically just that finding the Chaos Emeralds is more important in Shadow's mind than anything else that's going on around him. So I'll still make quick mention of what's going on in the levels, but the main plot is actually being conveyed more in the cutscenes here. Anyway, we ignore both Sonic and Black Doom, scoop up the 2 Chaos Emeralds, and finish up in Westopolis. We then see the gun commander being informed of the alien invasion and having his traditional freakout that Shadow dares to exist. This cutscene is the same no matter which path you take coming out of Westopolis, but with the context of our current route and Shadow electing not to help Doom, the commander just seems like he's taking out his frustration about his army's performance on Shadow. After the commander has his aneurysm, we join back up with Shadow, who's making his way out of Westopolis. Black Doom appears and starts bitching him out for not following orders like a good, obedient little boy, and seriously, look at the framing of this cutscene. Shadow looks like a bratty little kid who's being yelled at by his big holographic alien father. It's so funny out of context. Doom implies Professor Gerald had something to do with Shadow's current memory issues, which gets Shadow's attention and is a significant point we're going to come back to later. But Shadow isn't really able to press Doom for any more information before Doom non-consensually teleports him to Glyphic Canyon. Here we have the option to be joined by Knuckles, whose entire reason for being is smacking up the Black Arms, which is very on brand, to be fair. Or we can again be joined by Black Doom, who wants Shadow to touch his jewels to activate his temple. Yeah, I really wanted to word that a different way, but it's literally what the game says, so yeah. This level is the grounded version of the Air Fleet level, so I guess maybe the jewels need to be activated to get it airborne or something. Anyway, Shadow again decides that option C is the best and elects to just find the Chaos Emerald in the area and get out. Now, I'm going to go on a bit of a side tangent here since the level itself is pretty straightforward, and I'm going to address something that the game doesn't really talk about. How does Shadow even know that there's a Chaos Emerald here? Considering he doesn't really know where he was teleported to, it is a bit of a stretch to assume that he would know a Chaos Emerald was here in advance, right? Well, lore-wise, he actually kind of would know that. Now, I don't know the exact mechanics, but apparently in Sonic lore, it's easiest to think about the Chaos Emeralds as being sort of energetically drawn to each other like magnets. So Shadow would be able to tap into that energy and worst case scenario, be able to tell if there's an emerald nearby. Best case scenario, he'd be able to track down the emeralds from like really far away. So I felt the need to bring this up here because in a few levels, especially when doing the neutral missions, it's not really clear why Shadow would want to dash toward a seemingly arbitrary endpoint. Story-wise, once he grabbed that first Chaos Emerald in Westopolis, he's basically a Chaos Emerald radar. He knows when another emerald is around, and in the case of most neutral mission stories, he's prioritizing finding that emerald over whatever else is going on. After getting the Chaos Emerald in Glyphic Canyon, we see the President being briefed on the Black Arms invasion and lamenting a severe lack of Hedgehog Yowie. That's really it. This cutscene is not relevant to the larger plot, to be perfectly honest. Getting back to relevant stuff, we rejoin Shadow, who has theoretically tracked a Chaos Emerald to Prison Island. Like last time, being in a location that's familiar causes him to remember details of his awakening, including Eggman releasing him from stasis. So once again, he's getting little bits of his memory back, and that causes him to prioritize finding the Chaos Emerald here beyond anything else that's going on around him. After collecting the emerald on Prison Island, we cut over to Eggman, who's getting unreasonably mad that the Black Arms are doing his job better than he normally does. So he orders his robot army to engage the Black Arms to make himself feel a little bit better about his inadequacy. This brings us back to Shadow and Black Doom, who are chilling on the air fleet that I guess Doom somehow got airborne on his own, meaning that Doom would have to have gone and touched his own jewels. Eggman's fleet.jpg appears, which Shadow has a reaction to, and I feel like this is where the plot actually starts moving. With Doom mentioning Professor Gerald's connection to Shadow's memory very early on, and Shadow remembering Eggman releasing him from stasis, he now has a pretty good reason to believe that Eggman could be another means to recovering his memory. So Shadow aligns with Eggman to help take down Black Doom's fleet by destroying Doom's jewels. Yeah, insert CBT joke here, we're moving on. Now, after the air fleet level, it kind of seems like some information is missing to make the cutscene that follows it make sense, so I'm gonna headcanon a little bit here to try and fill in this gap. After the air fleet level, one of two things happened. Eggman either directly told Shadow to come and find his base in the jungle, or Eggman just kind of left before Shadow could question him, so Shadow found Eggman's base and came looking for answers. I feel like the latter option makes more sense, but either way, Shadow arrives near what is clearly one of Eggman's bases, but Sonic shows up, which Shadow is very thrilled about.
Not you again.
Sonic tells Shadow that the Black Arms are advancing into space and that he's going up to the Ark. Now, the mention of the Ark seems to make Shadow have a bit of a change in attitude, so he decides to join Sonic in going up there instead of tracking Eggman. On the way up, seeing the Ark triggers a significant chunk of Shadow's memory. He remembers that this is where he and Maria both quote-unquote died. Now, something to keep in mind here is that in Shadow's overall story, we know that he may have actually died at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, which is illustrated here. What isn't outright shown here is that the possibility also exists that this Shadow is one of Eggman's android copies of the original Shadow. This Shadow would also be aware of this because he's already seen at least one of these androids during the course of the Sonic Heroes story. Anyway, Shadow then has to deal with Sonic's inappropriately timed quipping and then heads out to the Ark. This takes us to the Space Gadget level, where our options are to race Sonic to the Chaos Emerald, winning being the hero mission, losing said race to complete the neutral mission, or aligning with Doom to shut down the Ark's defenses and effectively take over the Ark with the Black Arms. At this point, Shadow chooses to align with Doom to take over the Ark, which doesn't really make a lot of sense at first, but the fact that it doesn't make sense actually kind of makes sense when you look at the larger picture. Bear with me, we will come back to this point. Side note, this mission took me like 11 minutes to figure out. Let this be a warning, do not play Shadow 05 when you're hungover because you probably will struggle with simple tasks. It's worth clarifying here that even though the game makes it seem like if you don't do the hero mission, you won't get the Chaos Emerald, you do actually get the Chaos Emerald no matter which mission you do here. So even though shutting down the Ark's defenses takes longer than the race with Sonic, Shadow still ends up with the Chaos Emerald at the end anyway. After picking up the Chaos Emerald on the Ark, Shadow does a pretty good job of summarizing the pieces he's been able to put together on his own, so I'm actually just gonna let him recap here.
This ultimate life form they keep referring to is the Black Hedgehog, and he died, and I'm its copy. I must be the android Dr. Eggman created. Then it's clear what needs to be done. Doctor, you're going straight to the place you created me from.
Now, I'm not 100% sure what he means at the very end there, but as Shadow said, he now figures the best course of action is to track down Eggman, which brings us to Eggman's volcanic base in the lava shelter level. And I'm sorry, I have to take a moment to listen to this music because it's literally one of my favorite tracks in the game. I appreciate you letting me get that out of my system. So in this level, you have the option to be joined by Omega for the hero mission. To do this, basically all you have to do is get to Eggman further into the base, but at this point, Shadow actually wants to work with Eggman to activate the base's defenses to keep Gun out. Now this doesn't seem to make sense at first glance, considering that Shadow seemed to be actively pursuing Eggman on his own and wouldn't really care if Gun got in, but I promise this does make more sense in a minute. Having activated the base's defenses, Shadow and Omega come face to face with Eggman. Eggman sort of taunts Shadow by referring to him as Shadow Android and demands that he hands over his Chaos Emeralds, but Shadow flips the script on him. Shadow fully believes he's one of Eggman's androids, but he has 6 of the 7 Chaos Emeralds and fully intends to take Eggman out to get the last one. Obviously, Eggman isn't pleased about this, and he attacks Shadow and Omega. This brings us to the boss fight with Eggman and his robot Egg Dealer. Now this is a very slow fight that basically just comes down to repeated bursts of 3 homing attacks over and over again, with a couple of Chaos Blasts sprinkled in for variety. You guys are not going to believe this, but I swear to God, my controller died mid-fight again. We are literally 2 for 2 for my controller dying in the final boss fight. I had to restart the game this time to reconnect the controller, but taking out Eggman was no big deal besides that. And also besides the weird noises he makes right at the end. Having taken the last Chaos Emerald, Shadow stands over Eggman, who still leans into this Shadow being his own creation. You would think that in his position right now, he might actually relent and maybe tell Shadow what's actually going on, but for some reason he doesn't. Shadow proclaims himself to be the new ultimate life form, a Shadow android that will be a successor to and surpass the original Shadow. And then he literally just kills Eggman. At least that's what's implied. It doesn't outright say that he killed Eggman, but that's what I'm going with because that's what's heavily implied here. This path really is the definition of a slow boil. The first 3 levels are relatively uneventful on their own, but they serve as a really slow drip feed of information for Shadow. Doom starts off by introducing the concept of getting the Chaos Emeralds as a means to regain Shadow's memory, and then in passing mentions Gerald, and I truly believe that Doom fumbled the bag here. If he had kept his mouth shut, the Gerald-Eggman connection wouldn't have been so significant to Shadow when he remembered that Eggman released him from stasis on Prison Island. Coming to the air fleet and seeing Eggman's airships immediately set Shadow off. He's determined that Eggman is the better means of figuring out who he is because he has memory of Eggman and can actually get to him now. And this is where we actually take off story-wise in my opinion. Shadow gets sidetracked in his attempt to find Eggman after the air fleet and ends up going to the Ark, which completely changes everything. Seeing the Ark causes him to remember his own death, which is really fucked up if you think about it from his perspective. At this point, his entire worldview would have been shattered, which explains his rash decision to take out the Ark's defenses. He's angry, confused, and he's in a complete existential spiral, so of course he's going to make decisions that maybe aren't the smartest or maybe aren't the most consistent, which is why I said that this decision not making sense actually does kind of make sense. After he lashes out on the Ark, he refocuses and he determines, yeah, he is an android, but that's not going to stop him from gathering the rest of the Chaos Emeralds and forging his own path forward. Eggman having the last Chaos Emerald in his possession is the icing on the cake for Shadow at this point. Shadow activates the base's defenses to trap Eggman inside with him, not the other way around. And what better way for this Shadow to solidify his own autonomy than taking out his supposed creator and surpassing the original Shadow, the very being he's supposed to be a mere reflection of. So yeah, this story did require a little bit of piecing together and consideration to make into its own cohesive thing, but I actually really enjoyed this one. Not to compare it to Death Note again, because that's what I did last time, but it really gives me vibes of the final confrontation between Nier and Light at the end, sort of the theme of the successor cementing himself as having surpassed the original. It's really, really cool. Thank you guys so much for watching this over analysis. Let me know if this is something you want to see more of in the future by leaving a like or a comment or whatever you want to do. And until then, as always, I will see you in whatever I decide to do next. Later.